Hi and welcome to today's video where I'll be designing my first pattern collection. This is something that's pretty new to me. I haven't made very many patterns before, but I recently took a workshop from Miss Bonnie Christine that was all about surface pattern design, and I knew I had to try it for myself. What I've learned is that typically a pattern collection will have 8 to 12 patterns, with some patterns repeated in different colorways. I challenged myself to come up with 5 different pattern collections that I could make, and in this video I wanted to focus on my Mexico-inspired collection. I am Mexican-American, my family is from Michoacan, Mexico, and I wanted to pull inspiration from my childhood memories and textiles and colors that reminded me of where I'm from. I started out by looking through old photos and brainstorming ideas for what I could include in each pattern, which basically consisted of me word vomiting everything that I can think of that reminded me of Mexico onto a piece of paper. Once I had some inspo, I started fleshing out my ideas with some markers to bring it to life. I ended up with 8 pattern ideas that I wanted to attempt and figured I would have some duplicates in there in different colorways to get me to the 12 patterns that I needed. So now that I have everything drawn out, I need to find a color palette. I wanted all of the patterns to have a cohesive look and feel, so I wanted to make sure that I used specific colors for each one and that they were the same throughout. I ended up using one of my old paint chip palettes to find colors that I liked. I knew that I wanted a bright color palette, so I started gravitating towards greens, blues, oranges, and yellows. I finally came up with something that I liked, so I went to Illustrator to find similar colors that I could use there, and to also see what they looked like together. I knew I really wanted to include a cobalt blue color and a cream color, and you'll understand why in a second, but I went back and forth on whether or not to include this bright pink swatch or to go for a lighter blue. I ended up going with the light blue swatch. My first pattern was actually inspired by a few things, but mainly by a shirt Pedro Pascal wore. I really liked the embroidery on it, and this is why I really wanted to make sure that I included that cobalt and cream color. It also reminded me of embroidery that is on a lot of clothes and textiles in Mexican culture, so that's why I'm just drawing out a bunch of little strokes that kind of look like stitches to form my actual repeat pattern. My initial idea was to only use Procreate to make each pattern because I find that drawing feels more natural here than on Illustrator since I don't have a tablet to pair it with. But after I drew out the core part of the pattern, I struggled with it for a bit because I couldn't quite get it to fit within the bounds of the canvas. And that's the one thing about Procreate, is that your illustration will disappear if it's outside that box and you won't be able to get it back. So it made it really difficult, and I ended up giving up in Procreate and I moved over to Illustrator for the rest of the patterns. I just drew out some strokes and basically did the same thing that I did in Procreate. I also didn't have to worry about something getting cut off if I went outside the box, because Illustrator lets you keep everything. You can literally put your artwork outside the box and it'll just stay there even if you're not using it. So I could come back to it if I didn't need it. And the great thing about Illustrator is that I was able to accurately scale everything and make sure that it was all centered, which I couldn't necessarily do in Procreate. I was kind of just winging it. And this is what my first pattern looks like when it's all done. Moving on to the next pattern. This one was inspired by a song called Cielito Lindo, which is something that I used to hear all throughout my childhood. It translates into lovely sky, so I immediately knew I wanted to draw something having to do with the sky. So I went straight for clouds. This one was a lot simpler to draw out. Clouds are pretty easy, no matter what shape you make them, they all kind of make sense. I spent the most time trying to figure out what sparkle or star shape I wanted to include. None of them really looked right, but I ultimately ended up adding a few small sparkles and dots kind of mixed together, which you'll see at the end. And here's pattern number 2, finished in 2 different colorways. This next pattern was inspired by something called a rebozo, which is a Mexican shawl. I had a small one when I was little, and I remember my mom and my grandma having one. They're typically striped and super colorful. This pattern did have me scared though. I'm still new to making patterns, so learning to make a stripe repeat was a little bit more complicated in my head. It ended up being super easy in the end, but yeah, it took a little bit of time to figure it out. I added a few more designs and details within each stripe to make it look a little more accurate to what a rebozo would actually look like in person. And this is the final pattern. This is one of my favorite patterns. It was actually inspired by the ornate Mexican tile you see in houses, and it was kind of combined with art that you typically see on Mexican clay pottery, especially with the swooshes and the florals and stuff. So I was super excited to make it. It's simple, but I thought it was so pretty. I loved how this one came out so much that I ended up making it in a second colorway as well. The 5th pattern was inspired by the monarch migration that happens every year in my parents' hometown, which I recently learned. It was a bit of a mystery because I didn't really know how I wanted the pattern to look. I didn't know if I wanted it to be overlapping or kind of just spread out or add different elements to it like sparkles and stuff that you saw in the sketch, but I kind of just went with it. So I grabbed these old photos that I had taken myself a while ago to make sure that I got the butterfly shapes right, and then I started to build out 4 different butterflies in different colors. And here it is all finished. With my 6th pattern, I wanted to pay homage to local fruit vendors that I grew up seeing every time I visited family in LA. I headed back to Procreate for this pattern, which might have been a mistake in hindsight, but I really liked the texture and detail that I was able to include. Once it was done in Procreate, I headed to Illustrator to vectorize the illustrations. The issue with this pattern was that each illustration had tons of texture in it, which meant tons of points and lines that create that texture. It ended up slowing down Illustrator so much that at one point it was taking like 5 seconds to move a single illustration into a different spot. You'll see in this clip, I slowed it down to be at normal speed. It's not sped up at all, and it took forever. It takes like 5 seconds for it to get back into, like, to snap into place to where I wanted it. So moving all these things around the board to try and create the actual pattern was a nightmare. Illustrator crashed like a million times. Despite all that, I still ended up with a really fun pattern. This next pattern was roughly inspired by the landscape of Mexico. I was planning on making it my hero print, which is basically just the most complicated design in your collection. I don't want to say complicated, maybe complex. The vision in my head and my sketches were a bit different than what I ended up with, but I still really like it. I think at this point I was just fatigued. I had been working on these patterns for like a week straight at this point, so I was kind of running out of ideas, I guess, but still really like how it came out. The big flowers were my favorite part of this. And finally, the easiest pattern in my collection. I meant for this to be a compilation of elements from all the other designs, but in a sort of like doodly style that was a lot simpler. I also ended up doing dual colorways for this pattern, which brought my total number of patterns up to 12. To finish off the collection, I used some mock-ups to see how the patterns would look on things like journals and pillows. They really help bring the patterns to life and help you visualize what it would actually look like on a physical object rather than just seeing it as a digital work of art. I hope you enjoyed following along while I designed my first pattern collection. I have a few more in the works that I'm really excited about, so I hope you'll join me again in the next one.